Good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast, and good morning to anyone further west. This is
All right, it looks like we may have lost Nikki.
Uh-oh.
So I'm just...
Hello, everybody.
We'll just let Bradley go ahead.
Okay, no problem. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to a webinar here hosted by the Appalachian Foodshed Project. My name is Bradley Wilson. I'm a professor of geography at West Virginia University. I'm also the director of the Food Justice Lab here. I just wanted to start by saying thanks so much to the Appalachian Foodshed Project for inviting us to present our work today on WVFOODLINK, which is a project that's in part funded by the Appalachian Foodshed Project and also the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation. I'll speak to that in a couple more minutes. But I wanted to just start by saying thank you so much for having us and for welcoming us and joining the research team in North Carolina, in Virginia, and also, of course, here, the folks in West Virginia, in reimagining food economies in Appalachia. And I think this is a project that will hopefully speak to everyone on the call, and we'll do our best to sort of walk you all through what we're doing and what we've been up to. I will also just say it seems a little disembodied to be all linked together here, but I will say that I woke up this morning in Kingsport, Tennessee, and I drove home to Morgantown after a compelling two-day conference of the Appalachian Funders Network. So although a webinar might seem really virtual in space, I, for one, am not terribly virtual today. I'm quite exhausted from long travels and an intense and amazing two-day seminar, pretty inspiring seminar in Kingsport. And so I wanted to start with this image of the redbuds that I got a chance to see on my travels, because maybe you all in other parts of Appalachia or maybe on this call have seen this image. And I'll also just say that because of the bloom of spring, my throat is, my allergies are acting up. So I apologize from the start. Spring is here, though. So today I want to talk about a project that we've been working on called FoodLINK. What we've been working on over the past 2 years is research on emergency food networks that work with low-income families in West Virginia. And emergency food networks, and here we're talking about specifically agencies such as food pantries, soup kitchens, homeless shelters, and other similar agencies that provide emergency food in response to disaster situations that can be anything from the natural disaster, but also directly to personal disasters. So we've been looking at emergency food networks over the past year and trying to understand how they work and how they function. And the reason why is they become a really key link in food networks over the past 30 years. The rise of food banking and the distribution of food through emergency food networks has become a key component in people's monthly food budgets, and increasingly so. And so these are really important to us as researchers in the Food Justice Lab, in large part because our primary concern is working with low-income families and thinking about how to reconstruct and reconfigure food networks to work for them. The emergency food networks are also a really important moral economic site. So we've been talking a lot about building alternative food networks that respond to a different kind or a different idea of food economy. And emergency food networks are built around often concern about hunger. They are based on in humanitarian concerns. Often they're focused on confronting human vulnerability in real terms. The people who are working within emergency food networks are concerned about the distress of low-income families and people, the weakness of contemporary economic systems to serve people, and the need for extra economic care or an economy of repair to resolve what is an inadequate and existing food system. But the thing is that very often emergency food networks are not really accounted for in a really robust way. And we've been wondering why. And so part of this project is an exploration and a deeper exploration of how emergency food networks work in West Virginia, to make visible emergency food networks, and to understand its role in food security and in rethinking and reimagining food economies. So I want to start just by saying that this research has been really generously funded by the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, as well as the Appalachian Foodshed Project, and that we've had tremendous support from the Department of Geology and Geography here at WVU, and also a lot of what you'll see in terms of the development of our interactive maps, which I'll show you in a few minutes, and our website, WVFoodLINK, foodlink.wvu.edu. A lot of that design work was done in the West Virginia GIS Technical Center, which is also located and housed here in the Department of Geology and Geography. So what is FoodLINK exactly, and what do we do? First of all, we're an online resource hub that serves the Emergency Food Network in West Virginia, and will soon grow to develop tools for all who are food advocates in the state. We're an action research program. A lot of the work that we do in terms of advocacy and supporting new thinking about how to construct and organize and think about the Emergency Food Network is rooted in research. And so we've been working with various partners, from food pantries and food banks to farmers markets, increasingly too, looking and trying to understand and identify problems, to design studies that are responsive to the needs of those agencies, and then to communicate those results in real time. And I'll share a little bit of our experience with the communication of research results with some of the community food security assessments we've been doing, and engaging communities in sort of an active process of thinking through how to reimagine and rebuild food networks. And then also facilitating collaboration between different groups, so trying to enhance communication and promote shared vision within food networks. And really where we're coming from here is that there's kind of a significant gap between a lot of the contemporary work in alternative food networks and, let's say, the old alternative food network, or the long-term old alternative food network, one of them being the Emergency Food Network. And it's, I think that gap is an important one that we need to bridge, and we need to try to bring more people around the table to talk about food insecurity and ways to address it. And that means bringing various people into the conversation. Obviously, we've been talking a lot recently in the Appalachian Foodshed Project about engaging with farmers around food security and local production, but I think it's also important to integrate low-income families who are the most vulnerable into that conversation. And so the Emergency Food Network was a way to start that process of widening the tent, as Mark Wynn said in a recent meeting, and having a zero-tolerance policy for hunger in the state of West Virginia. Currently, in the state, there are 360,000 people in the state of West Virginia that depend on or need, for a short period of time each month, food assistance. So there are 360,000 people, according to our study, who are attending a food pantry, soup kitchen, or other food assistance agency in the state. And that's a very, very staggering number. And it also indicates, again, a very large number of people who depend on this network, but a lot of people who also work within this network to make it possible to deliver meals and food assistance. So that was one of the main reasons why we wanted to begin this research, was largely because of the volume of need and the potential for engaging with people around the restructuring or reconfiguration of food economies. Another reason that we wanted to focus on emergency food networks was because they are themselves incredibly vulnerable. And as we've learned, emergency food networks are underfunded. There are also equity and justice issues within emergency food networks in terms of who can get access to food. There's a lot of research and important arguments to be made about the problems within emergency food and with charity in general. power relations, racism, classism that is perpetuated through the emergency food system. So it's important to look at the emergency food system not only in terms of its scope, but also the politics of emergency food. But there's also a broader problem of the reduction in state benefits associated with, for instance, food stamps and SNAP, which is driving more and more people into the emergency food network and really increasing burdens that are being held by them, by the folks who are working and volunteering and raising money to keep emergency food functioning. So we're trying to really try to balance and reconcile the growing excitement about alt food and local foods in West Virginia with this existing emergency food network, and consider the potential for more resilient food economies that could be co-produced through emergency and alt food networks to create common vision in politics and a movement forward to address that. But first, we have a couple things we need to do. And the first thing that we wanted to do is to really build an inventory for planning. And this really requires a lot of work, and I want to walk you through our research process for building this inventory. And as you can see on the left-hand side here of this map, this is Mingo County. This is where West Virginia University's flagship university is located here in Morgantown. You know, we've been collecting based on a whole series of different factors, site and point location information for various different types of food network actors. For each of these points, which you see, which I can't really go into too much detail on right now, we've got to keep moving, but I just wanted to say that each of these is actually rich with information. As you'll see in the website that I'll show you a little bit later, they're in an interactive form. You can actually click on each of these for certain factors here. In certain agencies, you can click and learn more information right online. So who does FoodLINK serve? We wanted to do an inventory of food assistance agencies, alternative food networks, actors, and to really serve the people who serve low-income families, and also to support the families themselves. And this is just a series of pictures from a road trip that the FoodLINK crew took this past summer down to the Southern Coalfields, which is where we were doing our original pilot study. Just some images of different folks who we've met and talked to. We've compiled, in addition to the inventory, we've done around 80 interviews with key informants, all who are involved in emergency food, to try to really understand more deeply how this works and how to develop a kind of online technology that can facilitate and support the work of these folks. So the online resource hub that we've created, which I'll show you and do a little demo of in a little while, it's called FoodLINK, and there's several different aspects to this. I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to do this inventory and to get the website up right away is very often research happens in a vacuum, or it happens in the academy. We don't immediately distribute the results as quickly as possible, and we wanted to really build a sense of shared ownership over this information, and to build trust with the communities that we're working with. And so we wanted to make sure that in the research process, we were getting our information out there as quickly as possible. So we have a search button, which you can actually go and find emergency food assistance sites, their hours of operation and whatnot. In our search tool, we have an atlas which provides a view or a perspective on various issues associated with emergency food, with school lunch programs, with SNAP and WIC retailers, and then a Learn button, which we're still developing, but essentially it will serve as sort of a way for us to blog about and talk about various issues that we encounter and folks encounter, and stories as well within the emergency food system. Here's an illustration of kind of what the atlas looks like. It gives basic information on what the emergency food network is. And again, to drive home this point, this is about building trust with groups and communities, and really sharing the information that we're gathering in real time. And here's an illustration of how you could search through and look at specifically the search function, which we'll show you in real time in a couple of minutes. So our audience with the website, which is the first result of the research that we've done in FoodLINK, is we have three audiences. One is food security advocates, and that could really be a very broad range of people, which maybe many of you even on the call would consider yourselves a food security advocate. But then we also have specifically folks who work with low-income families and are helping them identify resources that they might need to address their immediate food needs. So social workers and family resource networks, directors, church groups, educators, counselors, union organizers, community volunteers who are trying to make sense of sort of the terrain of resources that are out there. And then, of course, the last group is people in need specifically. So low-income families who are trying to make sense of how to piece together a food budget on a monthly basis, of which emergency food is an important component of that. But then, of course, as well, finding out where your DHHR office is and getting signed up for food stamps to get access to government benefits as well, incredibly important. But all of this is rooted in research. So that inventory that we've been building is really very labor intensive, and it's been the focus of FoodLINK's work over the past year. And that means there are a lot of people involved. So here's just an illustration of some of the folks who have been involved. Just 14 here, and there's even more who've got involved in the last 2 months that aren't even represented here. But when you see the website later, or if you've taken a look at it already, or you actually get a chance to look at the back end of this inventory, this is thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of work to collect baseline information on the kinds of institutions and agencies that exist to address food insecurity in the state of West Virginia. From Evan Fedorko in the GIS Tech Center, to Thompson Gross, who created the cartography, to Jessica Crum, who's done the research on food security programs in farmers markets, to countless undergraduate students who made telephone calls to small convenience stores to ask them if they actually have fresh produce available. So thousands and thousands of hours of work to locate and identify and build this inventory. In West Virginia, there's two major food banks that we've also partnered with and have been critical in moving the project and research forward. Mountaineer Food Bank, which serves 48 counties in West Virginia, and Facing Hunger Food Bank, which currently serves 12 counties in West Virginia. And they have some overlap, service area overlap, which has been a very interesting aspect of the study as well. The relationship between the food banks I can't get really into right now, but again, coming out of the interviews, some of the things that we've learned over time, and I'd be happy to answer questions about the structure and organization and configuration of emergency food networks is very fascinating, and it's been really eye-opening and really important to make sense of as we go forward as a movement and as a research community in thinking about how to, again, reimagine and develop a more equitable food system and resilient food system in West Virginia and beyond throughout Appalachia. Our pilot study was with the Facing Hunger Food Bank Service Area. That was the initial project that was funded by the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation. I'm going to focus on that initially here. We also worked on 3 additional clusters that were funded by the Appalachian Foodshed Project, one of which we'll be talking about at the end. The northern cluster, which includes Monongalia County, Preston County, and Marion County. Like I said before, building partnerships with the food banks, meetings with the food banks, and really leveraging their knowledge, but also making sure that we're really connecting with those local organizations as well. So the survey data that we've collected, I mean, just to give you, again, a sense of the back-end work that goes into this, this is not for the faint of heart. We had last summer in 2014, we had 6 employees working on telephone calls. We actually developed a call center in the lab here at WVU, and we called over 250 food assistance agencies, and I'd say something like 1,200 grocery stores, big box retailers, Dollar Generals, convenience stores, farmers markets, you name it, in our pilot study area. This became the sort of model methodology for how we would then go about developing the inventories in all of the other counties. And again, this is very comprehensive. I would love to turn it over to some of the folks who did this work with us to give you a sense. Sometimes these telephone calls were 2 minutes long, and sometimes these telephone calls were half an hour to an hour long, almost mini interviews, because the food pantry agencies just wanted to talk about how messed up the system was, how they wanted to see change, how frustrated they are, how you just need to know how many people are coming this month. We're serving, twice as many people this year as we were serving last year. So we really got a sense through this research, not only the kind of quantitative, location-based spatial data that we were initially looking for, but we got a lot more than we bargained for in a lot of these interviews, and gathered a lot of really important qualitative information that we collected. The hardest part of the work was location. As many of you working in Appalachia recognize, it's not always easy to find what you're looking for. And when it comes to identifying a church pantry that is based in a small warehouse adjacent to a church, how do you actually point that on a map? How do you get the latitude and longitude points? Well, again, very labor-intensive work, hours, thousands and thousands of hours of work to identify, actually using Google Earth and point drops to find where these places are. And then the back-end database really breaks down all of these different agencies, and we have two primary databases, all connected through a common file, but one which is really focused on commercial retailers, trying to understand the SNAP and WIC landscape, and then the other, which is food assistance agencies, which again are hot meal programs like soup kitchens and food pantries, Meals on Wheels programs, and then also backpack programs, which have grown over the last 2 to 3 years. And what you find, again, as you start to map some of these things, is a real tremendous network diversity, for instance, within the food assistance networks. Backpack programs, food pantries, hot meal programs, and meal delivery programs are all present in different communities and different volumes. I mean, the amount of people that are being served by these agencies differ. The way that the agencies are set up are very different. And so when we talk about emergency food, we're talking about an incredibly diverse and complicated network that don't always see eye to eye and are working at different purposes. And we are able to collect information on things like number of people that are served each month in each agency, and trying to visualize that to, again, provoke dialogue and conversation amongst agencies. In our initial participatory action interviews and focus groups, when we show these maps to people, it provokes a conversation. And that was, again, the point of the research process. It wasn't in creating an inventory for creating an inventory's sake, or just to collect quantitative data to do a fascinating analysis, but to actually communicate the results and immediately, as quickly as possible, to the communities that have participated in the study. This is another fascinating one, staffing for emergency food network entities. So, the difference between massive volunteer networks and the really small number of staff that are actually working with an emergency food, not probably unlike alternative food networks, where you might have the difference between a farmer's market that's run by volunteers and a farmer's market that has a paid staff member that's managing that. So thinking about, again, staffing and labor, we've been very interested in the idea of labor and the work that goes into making food networks happen. And when we look at emergency food networks, we've got a lot more hands on deck that are working on these issues. On a weekly, almost on a weekly basis. Then we also have refrigeration and perishability, again, thinking about the questions of fresh produce, which is, again, another concern and question within emergency food. How can we get low-income families access to even locally produced fruits and vegetables? Well, we got to have the right infrastructure, and so we were asking questions about that as well. Sourcing strategies. Where are these agencies getting access to food that they're then delivering to the folks who are in need? Are they getting it through the USDA, of which we can talk more at length in question and answer? Are they getting it through a Feeding America affiliate like Kroger or from Walmart? What are the qualities of those foods? We haven't quite broached that subject. I mean, we've gotten into that in interviews, but we don't have any really detailed analysis yet. But that's a direction that we're going, is trying to understand food qualities and how we can intervene or think about that as communities. And then, of course, on the other side, so that was the food assistance. On the other side, we have SNAP and WIC retailers, which when you just take all retailers, looks like an interesting and more pretty comprehensive landscape of assistance when it comes to SNAP. But when it comes to WIC, which is usually an indicator of access to better quality foods, we have in southern West Virginia not as many agencies providing and supplying that kind of food. When you actually break it down by kind of retailer type, so when you look at convenience stores, we see convenience stores are pretty present, and there are a lot of them. The number of them that actually accept WIC or actually would have, again, this illustrates to some degree some of those food desert questions which are of concern and people are thinking about. But we didn't want to just stop with the, again, aggregation of an inventory and the creation of some snazzy maps that we can post online and provoke conversation. But we actually want to go back and actually work with communities. So this is I want to talk briefly here before I quickly demo the website. Our next phase of research, if our first phase of research was developing an inventory and really trying to understand what's out there, the next phase of the project is taking our inventory to the people, so to speak, and asking folks what all of this means to them. And we had a meeting about 3 weeks ago now, or almost a month ago now, with the Food and Hunger Committee of Monongalia County. It's an organization of 14 food pantries that meet monthly to talk about strategies for raising funds and sharing experiences, and they manage a fund that is a shared fund amongst all 14 agencies in case of one of the food pantries, for instance, falls into or has a disaster, loses energy, something breaks down, they can supply funds to them. So they meet regularly, and so they're an anti-hunger organization, and we wanted to share our research results. This is a group that really inspired this research from the start, so we wanted to go back to them and share our results. And what we did was we gave a presentation, the exact presentation that you're all getting right now, for 14 ladies who've been running pantries for years and years and years. And then we printed out some large-scale maps with some of our data, and we asked them to engage with it. We put them out on the tables. We plotted the locations of their pantries, for instance, and we asked them to draw the service area boundaries. So who do they serve and where do they serve them? And it provoked a whole really interesting conversation between them about service area boundaries, and it also raises questions then. So if my service area is all of Monongalia County, meaning I accept anybody who walks through my door who's from Monongalia County, I'm going to serve food, it usually means that you have the resources to do that. Some pantries don't. Some pantries don't have the money monthly, so they create more rigid boundaries around their service area. So it provoked an interesting conversation among the ladies who were there about how they run their pantries, the nature of their service areas and who they serve, the kinds of prerequisites that they develop which can limit people's access to food, So we often think about emergency food as about promoting food access, but in fact, within emergency food networks, there's also the denial of access to food in certain respects. So we started to sort of tread into that territory. It provoked a whole conversation about, well, who is coming to the pantries, and a lot of discussion about that, this is not, the regular old, conversation about, lazy people who don't want to work and they come to food pantries. These ladies are talking about working poor families who are living in Monongalia County, which is supposed to be, the sort of shining star of economic development, zero or very, very low unemployment, but 26% of the population of Monongalia County lives below the poverty line, and they're working families. So these are their clients, and they're concerned about that. And so we wanted to talk about that as well. And the most important thing about the results of this, when we went to the group discussion, was that the map was broken. The map didn't work for them. And the main reason the map didn't work is because through the process of consultation over this period, they said, whoa, we've been meeting as Monongalia County for the past however long, but when we start drawing our service areas, we realize we're actually serving people in Marion County, and we're serving people in Preston County, which means that the boundaries that we've created, the spatial boundaries around which we have defined hunger and our efforts to resolve the hunger problem are not right. And we had followed that logic ourselves as researchers. And so we stepped back and we said, well, okay, we're going to come back in a couple months. We're going to come back with a new map, and let's try to invite the folks from Preston County who are working in food assistance or anti-hunger work and advocacy, and the people from Marion County, and we'll have a larger conversation about this, and maybe we'll move towards some collaborative work. And they seem very excited about that. So again, in terms of the participatory action research, it's about moving from this inventory that we've been collecting into a mapping process that shares this data that we've been collecting with folks, and then encourages them and invites them to then speak to the research and its value to them, so that we can then go back to the drawing board and develop new questions and develop new research methodologies. Another fascinating point that came out of this meeting was that the ladies were talking about how even the poverty statistics that we had represented in the meeting were wrong. Because if we look at the poverty rate, or you're looking at this qualification, no, we need a different metric to address the question of food insecurity or financial insecurity. We need a self-sufficiency standard. And they start articulating different economic measures that we need to develop as researchers. They're telling us what we need to develop as researchers so that we can more accurately represent the problem that people are facing. And they wanted us to know these things. And they were very smart, and they were very pointed, and they knew what they were talking about. And it was a great, great experience of discussion and dialogue that comes through, I think, a participatory action posture, in that the folks in the community know the problem. They're working on the front lines of these issues, and if as researchers we can walk with them and support those efforts with research, we can learn a great deal. So here's this is the map that they created. We created part of the map, and they made the other part of the map. All these lines sort of describing the different service areas. Some are more blunt, some are really specific. They wanted to draw areas where there need to be food pantries or food assistance agencies. A very fascinating methodology to get people talking. The other fascinating thing about the mapping process is that people feel really empowered through this process of, I know what my service area is, so I have something to share in this conversation, which kind of breaks the ice in a lot of ways to actually get dialogue going. So a very valuable aspect of what we're doing. This is, again, now we're going at the inventory from a larger perspective, Monongalia, Marion, and Preston County. And over the next couple months, we'll be reaching out to and inviting more people into this conversation to start talking about how the Emergency Food Assistance Network works, but also maybe over time, and this is something I think for discussion and something I'm looking forward to hearing from other AFP members and other researchers and other community members, their thoughts, but how to actually go about facilitating a dialogue, not just among the emergency food network, but inviting in farmers, inviting in social workers, inviting in farmers market directors, inviting in food hub directors to really foster a big tent discussion about food insecurity. But again, I think what we're trying to do is to lay the groundwork for and make sense of how you actually do that process and build that process using mapping and research as its basis. So with that, I'll just say, the next steps of the project is further collaboration with the partners that we've been developing, a big research push in 2015, which again, thanks to Appalachian Foodshed Project, we have the funding, and the Benedum Foundation as well, who's given us a second phase project budget to complete all of West Virginia. So that initial inventory that you saw for Monongalia County will actually be for all 55 counties in West Virginia, and if possible, we'll break the seam and get out of West Virginia as well and grow even further. And then to continue doing interviews and to experiment with our PAR process over the course of this year. We have roughly 15 focus groups / PAR experiments that we're setting up, 15 of those over the next 6 months. So we're looking forward to learning from that process. And without further ado, I'll just quickly jump to our website and give you a quick demo. So we wanted to create something that was dignified, and any person who go there could get on and easily get access to this information. So we put it to the website of the university website. Again, this was designed by the West Virginia GIS Technical Center here in the Department of Geology and Geography, specifically Frank Lafone and Evan Fedorko and Jessica Foster, who put a ton of time into this to make it look really good, but also make it function well. So let's try the search button. Here you got our search tool, and here are the completed counties thus far. Sorry, AFP folks, we are rushing to get your clusters online. They'll be up next week, I promise. So we'll have a cluster here. You can see my cursor. We have a cluster here that's AFP funded, a cluster here that was AFP funded, and a cluster down here that was AFP funded, largely around a lot of the interesting sort of production networks that are developing. So those will be live within 2 weeks, I'll say, barring any glitches. So you go to Selecta County. Let's go to Mingo County. And immediately pops up the DHHR office, which is what we wanted to come up first, because that's the first place folks need to go if they want to get access to the benefits that will get them through most of the month, hopefully. That is, of course, given government cutbacks, those SNAP benefits are not going quite as far as they used to. WIC office, hours of operation. These things are, again, a lot of research goes into this. Hot meal programs. There's actually not a hot meal program in Mingo County. That's telling, right? I mean, that's important to think about, right? Food pantries, we've got one, House of Hope. Meal delivery programs, Coalfield Community Action Partnership does meal delivery. On the retailers, we actually created a hierarchy. We put grocery stores first. We created a very simple and easy to communicate set of symbology. Do they accept SNAP? Do they accept WIC? Do they have produce? As you can see here, there's really interesting thing about the research when we were doing the interviews with the grocery stores was the real threat to grocery stores in many of the counties in southern West Virginia, but really across West Virginia with the development of the Dollar General, Family Dollar colonization of rural America, which has really hurt grocery stores, not because of produce, but because of dry goods and other types of things that they really can't compete often. Then we have convenience stores, and looks like that's it there. We do not have a farmer's market represented, nor a big box retailer represented. So the other value here is you can actually move this map around and you can click on things. So here's a food pantry, which didn't pop up there, but Parsley Bottom. which we met the director partially about in the summer. We actually volunteered at that food pantry this summer on a trip down there. But as you can see, the information that's available is very detailed. Again, the amount of work that goes into this is tremendous. Open the 4th week of the month on Thursday. All right, how do you get that information? That is not an easy calculable piece of information to just easily pop up. So those require interviews and conversations. Hours of operation are 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. All right, so we have 250 different agencies that are represented there. As I said before, thousands of retailers. Another interesting thing you can do is you can click and make disappear or invisible different things. There's that. And then, of course, you can just quickly jump to another county if you like. And I'm going to take you back home real quick and show you the atlas. Just again, these are some of the images and maps that we've created. On the right-hand side, you can at your leisure, look through and analyze and draw your own conclusions. And as we develop, we are rolling these out on a monthly basis. So here's the Federal Food Assistance Program, SNAP and WIC. With that information, with enrollment, we've collected information on benefits issued, the retailers that are the classification of the retailers, the other aspect of the data we've been collecting is calling all the government agencies and asking them to share their databases with us. So we actually have an incredibly comprehensive database on SNAP and WIC. We also have the school meal programs, which will be, again, up within two weeks. We'll have an atlas for the school meal programs. And then lastly, which is a huge push that's going to be probably starting in the fall, is to update and clean and improve the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition's inventory of all food groups, farmers markets, CSA programs, meat processors, and all those kinds of things will be into our database too, and we'll be creating an atlas for that hopefully by December 2015. And the last, of course, is the Learn, which we're still developing, but you guys can follow us here. But we also want to try to do more social networking. This is probably the weakest link on our site so far, I feel like, and something that we're going to be developing over time. But we really want to use this as a basis for having conversations, and hopefully those of you who are here on the call can help us out and get us linked up and support that work. So with that said, I want to end my conversation there. I've gone a little over time. I apologize, but we have about 15 minutes for questions. I'd be happy to take them, and if we even go past 1 o'clock, I'd be happy to take them. I'll also say for those of you who are on virtually, there's also 7 people in the room here with me as well. So I'm also going to, at some point after we answer some questions on the stack that Nikki has identified, we will also open up for the folks who are here at WVU who want to pose a question if they have one. So thank you guys so much for your attention, and looking forward to answering some questions.
Thank you, Bradley. This is Nikki. I'm vocal again, so I'm sorry I missed out on the first little bit. We do have a question from Josh. As you expand, have you thought about how to handle collaborations with border counties in Virginia, as an example?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think what we learned in the conversation around border counties within West Virginia is that these borders there are aspects of the borders that are rarely fixed. For instance, the USDA and Feeding America have actual boundaries that they define that the food banks are operating within. But food pantries and agencies that serve low-income families, and of course low-income families themselves, are moving mobily across borders. They're working with different agencies across borders as well. So I think if you use PA, Pennsylvania border, for instance, Monongalia County borders southern PA counties, and so folks are coming from PA in some regards. Some are coming across from PA boundaries to come to food pantries. Sometimes they're getting turned away because they don't actually have proof of address, but in other cases they might not. Another point, though, is that Facing Hunger Food Bank actually does serve Kentucky and Ohio and West Virginia, and so they straddle, because they're based in Huntington area, they actually straddle multiple states. So I guess the answer to the question, I think that the borders actually need to be a basis of conversation. So they need to be a topic of conversation. So I think that again, it's something that we found in the initial research is a really fascinating starting point, even getting people across borders to talk. So I mean, if you're talking about Bluefield, West Virginia, there's absolutely no reason why you can't have Virginia trying to facilitate conversations across borders. I mean, I think that people really do need to be in conversation together.
Thanks, Bradley. Josh is following up with that. He said he only asked because due to terrain, it may be easier for people to get to a border county in another state to get emergency food help. So I think you sort of addressed that, and he thanked you for that.
Yeah.
Kristen McCartney she didn't have a question. I wanted to make sure you could see her comment, though.
Okay.
She would like to let you know. Can you see these at this time, or are you still?
Yes. Yeah, no question. Yeah, so just like to let you know that we received SNAP Ed funding to promote nutrition and food access across the state, and would love to work with you on dissemination of the tool. Very cool, very cool. Yeah, I'm interested. So let's definitely try to find a time offline to talk more about that. We'd be really excited about that. And we would really also love, I mean, one of the things that we've been learning through this process is there's so many details that need to be shared with the Emergency Food Network participants themselves, and I'm sure you're doing that yourself on a direct basis, but sharing that kind of information is critical and huge, and can be really incorporated into, I think, later iterations of the participatory action research process, where, I mean, communities want researchers to share information with them. You know, they really do. Like, you know, if you've got some information to share, then that's great. What they don't like is to be told what to do. That really shuts down. I'm laughing because the folks in the room are smiling. It really shuts down conversations. So I think offering up that kind of information is huge. So I'm super excited to hear more about that, Kristen. Were there any other questions?
There's one more from Josh.
Okay, yeah. So talking a little bit more about the funders for the project and who might be willing to fund similar projects. Yeah, it's really interesting. I just left the Appalachian Funders Network meetings in Kingsport, Tennessee. The funder for this project, we were funded by the Claude Worthington Benetham Foundation out of their Health and Human Services arm, it was a little bit outside of their current funding priorities, but the program officer that I've been working with was really eager to see this come to fruition, and so they kind of made it a bit of a special project that they wanted to invest in. Excuse me. So that really gave us the initial impetus. The Appalachian Foodshed Project, each of the states and each of the universities who are associated with the project, each of the PIs on the project, the primary investigators on the projects, they have funds, some funds to conduct research, but also to support impactful programs that promote food security and promote other kinds of activities. So I'm not 100% sure. In West Virginia, there's a couple requests for proposals out for food access programs at farmers markets. But in terms of building this program and developing this, there's, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's small funding from community foundations we found. one of the funding project, well, one of the funders who we have not yet heard back from, but is very supportive, are some of the place-based community foundations, like the Sisters of St. Joseph Charitable Fund, which is based in Parkersburg, and also the Parkersburg Area Community Fund. But look around for a community fund in your region and see if they would consider supporting a project. But yeah, there's not a ton of funding out there, and a lot of it is to do what we've done with the funding that we've had, we've really had to be very budget conscious and really stretch the dollar as much as possible to build this.
And Bradley, before you go into Garnett's question, can you give us some idea of, so if you were to give an estimate, if somebody were to do a similar project somewhere else, about how much money would they be talking about? You don't have to, if you can't off the top of your head, that's fine, but.
I couldn't actually, because I think that the nature of this is that I mean the other so there's two ways to answer that question. One is that to do the startup, to actually do the pilot. So the pilot for this project costs $75,000. That wasn't even enough for the pilot. And the reason why I say that is the development of the database, the design of the site, the labor to do all those calls was a lot of labor of love kind of stuff. And a lot of the people who put time and energy into that were really going above and beyond. But I think that now that we are now in a position to complete the study, maybe with a little bit fewer dollars, perhaps to some degree. We've added a lot more work onto what we're doing now. But the basic inventories are so time intensive that just knowing how to go about doing it methodologically was such a learning curve that it's a big project to take on. Now, the second caveat to that is we are interested in partners. So one of the aspects of this visit to the Appalachian Funders Network meeting was, look, we have the team in place. We just need the support and help to identify the agencies that are working in your area. And then I think in the long term, we can potentially support, FoodLINK will be able to support community organizers in regions around West Virginia, but also in other parts of Appalachia potentially. And one of the areas that we've been looking at right now is actually developing a training program for organizers and working with AmeriCorps Vista as one of the bases for funding that project. So Garnett, I think these maps are awesome. Thank you, Garnett. As snapshots in time, am I wrong? Very good. As West Virginia's emergency food system changes, does the system take kindly to easy updates? And is there a way to engage citizens in data collection in their community? So one of the folks that we're hiring this summer to work with us is going to work with us on developing more of a real-time survey technique. Historically, these kinds of inventories are created at one time. So the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition did a survey about 2 years ago on alternative food assistance, and a lot of it's out of date. And I think that the problem is that like that database, our database could come out could be become out of date quickly as well. And that's the problem. We're going to be doing quarterly updates, and we're going to be doing hopefully biannual surveys. The only way that we can do that, though, is by actually making everything visible and building trust that when people fill out a survey, it is immediately updated, or updated at least, somewhat frequently. So we have an effort underway this summer to do some surveying, again, with agencies that we've already worked with. We've created an online survey, and we've partnered with the food banks to get that survey out. So hopefully we'll be able to get good response rates. But also, obviously, we're inviting people to contact us, and we're sending out a postcard in the next couple weeks, just asking people to check the website, check their information, update things. So again, we're hoping that we'll be able to keep this in perpetuity updated, and this is not just a showcase fixed in time item. So hopefully that answers your question. Engaging the citizenry in this, I think that there are a number of institutions who are going to, we've already seen, there are a number of organizations and institutions who want to see this thing remain in place, and hopefully we'll be able to mobilize volunteers, mobilize university folks, students, in efforts to make sure we keep this thing updated.
Thank you, Bradley. I think that's all the questions we have in the chat box at this time. Do you have a question, Nikki?
Yeah. Anybody? Yeah. Do you have a question, Nikki, or do you want to? Anybody in the room have a question? I'm getting blank stares here, Nikki. Can you save us? I don't know. Do you have any questions or any thoughts? Any thoughts? I mean, you're in a unique position in being able to see the sort of broader scope of AFP projects. I'm just curious. Do you have any questions that I could speak to that sort of the AFP context?
Sure, yeah, and Cheryl can chime in here as well. I'm really curious about and excited about adding in the information from the what you're terming the alternative food network and the intersection between those. I know that's a question Cheryl's been really interested in, and I don't know, have you had any preliminary findings with regard to the intersection of those two?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Preliminary findings, not so much yet. We're now being able to sort of, how do I put it? We now can put everyone on the map for the first time. So this past about 2 or 3 weeks ago, through our relationship with the Food and Farm Coalition, which has kind of grown again through kind of relationships of trust and developing a sense of feedback, we had a chance to work through with their database. And one of the issues, you know, again, this stuff gets really technical, but like making databases speak to one another is not an easy thing. And I'm looking here at Thompson, and Josh, and others who, you know, have been working through that. Aside from, you know, we're going to need to do surveying of the old food network as well. And I think, you know, going forward, you know, our goal, like I said before, was to sort of start with emergency food and begin to integrate those networks. But in Mon County, I'll just give you 2 examples of AFP funds has funded in part, and another that has been a sort of an organic development, but in part due to Josh Lones, who's so the Deputy Director of FoodLINK, who's in the room with me here, and he maybe is going to want to talk about this. But there's 2 really interesting projects that are happening here in Mon County, one of which is a pantry-based CSA program, which is actually run by Starting Points, which is based out of the Shack Neighborhood House, and the director of that program is Stormy Matlick. But that was facilitated by a Vista volunteer who also now works with us, Jenna Mosley Lones, who's Josh's partner. And that's a CSA to pantry program, which was again partly AFP funds and partly funded through other means. And that's an interesting project that's been developing in Morgantown, again, where it's a cross between sort of a hybrid or a co-produced network, food network between local farmers and a pantry. That's been, again, it's been really interesting, and we're just, again, learning about that, and I think that'll kind of come out over time. I can't speak to that specifically. And the other program is Scotts Run Settlement House, which is another very large and important player in the emergency food system here in Monongalia County, has partnered with the Mountain People's Co-op, which is a food hub here. And this was facilitated in large part by Josh. I turn it over to him because he could give more detail, but essentially the idea was how could the Mountain People's Co-op provide very low-cost food that could be purchased by food pantries. And, you know, in our analysis, we found that the budgets of food pantries are not insignificant. And they are buying food, and they're buying food from Walmart, or they're buying food from other wholesalers. And if our food hubs can supply food pantries with good food and food at a decent price, then I think there's a really interesting possibility for co-producing a different kind of network there as well. So we're seeing it in Montague County, but hopefully we'll get more of that. And you know, again, part of our goal is in these focus groups to get more of that going forward. But until we get our inventory straightened out of the alt food stuff and the local food stuff, we won't see that on the map quite yet. We need to really make sure that that gets fixed as soon as possible.
That's great. Thank you so much, Bradley, and thank you for sharing this tool with us. I'm really excited about it, and I look forward to seeing it continue to develop and become even more of a tool for folks in the state. So, anybody else? Cheryl, do you have any last questions before we close up?
No, just thank you so much, everyone.
All right.
Very good. Well, thanks everyone for bearing with us here, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to learn a little more about FoodLINK, and we'll keep you updated.
Hi, Jean.